What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Jimmy James 59, and today I'm going to be doing a civilization concept overview on the Khitans, a proposed civilization to Age of Empires 2 that I envision as part of a hypothetical Masters of Eurasia DLC that would also feature the Georgians and the Khwarezmians. I have already done videos on those two civilizations. I will put them in the description to this one so you can access those links. I will encourage you that if you enjoy the video to give it a like. If you want to leave some thoughts, agree, disagree, that kind of thing with the civ design, definitely leave a comment. And if you're new to the channel or you haven't subscribed, I highly encourage you to do so. That being said, let's jump into the video. What I'm going to do here, in this video, I'm going to give you a little bit of history, talk to you about the approach that I'm going to take here with the Khitans. But honestly, we're going to spend most of the time on the nuts and bolts of the civilization, thinking about bonuses, tech tree, unique technologies, units, etc. A little bit of history for you. The Khitans are around for a number of centuries, and their society proceeds in several phases, kind of beginning in a state of tribal warfare, becoming a vassal state of the Tang dynasty, and eventually establishing the Lao dynasty in northern China, which lasts for a couple centuries before it is taken over by the Jurchen-led Jin dynasty. However, that does not end the Khitans' run in the historical limelight. Many Khitans migrate westward. They form what is recognized as the Western Lao dynasty, and also known as the Karakitai. That lasts for about a century before it is dispersed by the Mongols. Speaking of the Mongols, the Khitans are considered para-Mongolic. The reality is that the Khitans also probably had a number of other peoples that would be included in their society. And I think at the end of the day, what we have is something of a fusion of those nomadic steppe customs that would be traditional to the Khitans, but also the customs of perhaps more sedentary populations that would be incorporated into their civilization. And the Khitans are not only a force in northern China, but also dealt with Turkic Khanates, as well as had an impact on the Korean Peninsula as well. So the Khitans are definitely a major player in the region. Introducing the Khitans into AOE2 DE does bring with it some challenges. The main one is that we already have a lot of Turkic and steppe civilizations that the Khitans are already quite similar to, and that means that we're adding another civ that has a lot of common elements with civilization types that are probably overrepresented. That means at some point we start to run out of degrees of freedom to make the necessary changes to a civilization in terms of bonuses, tech tree, etc., to give the civ its own unique playstyle and identity. And yet we are somewhat bound by the fact that we do need for civilizations to at least resemble their historical counterparts. So, is it worth bringing them into the game? I'd argue the answer to that question is yes. The Khitans were major players in Eastern and Central Asian history, and as I mentioned earlier, they're a composite society, so to speak, and I think they could bring something new and unique into AOE2. Now, it is worth noting there's been some controversy as of late regarding the inclusion of new civilizations. The Romans sparked a discussion regarding what the appropriate timeline is for the game, and I think there is ongoing dialogue regarding what civs in AOE2 actually represent. Are they peoples, cultures, polities? Could we even extend some dynasties as civs in the game, etc.? There's also the question of how to take the very vast history of China and somehow incorporate it into the game with a degree of accuracy that is appropriate. And of course, that even spawns separate questions that relate to history and politics and balance and gameplay and practicality. Now, those are worthwhile questions. I'd be happy to address them in a future video. But as it pertains to the Khitans, would they become problematic if added? And my answer to that is I think that's very doubtful. To start off, the Khitans are already kind of in the game. The character Kushluk, who's featured in the Genghis Khan campaign, is at that time the leader of the Karakitai, coming to power by a coup. Now, this isn't really mentioned, and that's probably for the best because it's kind of an unsatisfactory way to introduce the AOE2 audience to the Khitans. Furthermore, their origins, their distinctiveness, their role in history, I don't think is the subject of any major disputes at this time. And we can invite a comparison to the Mongols, in fact, because the Mongols are similar to the Khitans in that they are something of a steppe civilization that does go on to establish their own imperial dynasty. To my knowledge, there is no controversy in the game regarding the fact that the Mongols are represented separately from the in-game Chinese and the Yuan dynasty, which, would be, Mongol-led. Now, it is worth noting that the Khitans are not represented by the in-game Chinese, but I think that is much more of a function of convenience than an attempt at accuracy. The Khitans are probably a bit too far north, I think, to be represented by the Chinese in the sort of time that the game and the space that the game wants to represent. And I would say, additionally, the Lao dynasty, led by the Khitans, is not the only dynasty in the Middle Ages that is not represented. We have not seen the Jurchen-led Jin dynasty represented, or the Sui dynasty as well, that occurs much earlier in the Middle Ages. At some point, you just kind of have to decide what you want to bake in, and again, when you have a really vast history to cover across time and space, well, there's just some parts of it that are going to get left out for practical reasons. What I think this does, though, is that it does give us a nice opportunity to take a moment and fit the Khitans into a DLC with at least two civilizations with whom they share something of a transcontinental thread. The Georgians and the Khwarezmians and the Khitans are, to some extent, all kind of related, stretching across the vast space of Eurasia. The Georgians and the Khwarezmians are linked because Jalal ad-Din fights the Georgians at the Battle of Garni and inflicts a major defeat on them, and the Khwarezmians are also, for a time, a vassal state of the Karakai. So it really makes sense that we would have these civs all together, and I like the fact that we can show that civilizations that are in sort of different regions, so to speak, a pretty wide region as well, do have these associations. So for that reason, I don't think that the Khitans would be problematic. In fact, I actually think that they would be welcomed into the game, and it would just be a great opportunity to showcase a lot of world history. Now let's talk about some of the ideas for the civilization. Well, in terms of themes, we want to take on that sort of composite civ idea of nomadic and sedentary properties. We want to reflect the fact that the Khitans were also a major player in China, but then moving westward with the Karakai, where they displaced the Karakhanid Khanate, that we also should see a Turkic element of them as well, so we'll bake that in. And at the end of the day, we want to see mounted units, archery, hunting, this kind of thing be brought out of the civ. Now in terms of civ bonuses, I'm going to run through these pretty quickly and then cover each one of them in more detail. The Khitans are classified as an archer civilization, and their bonuses are as follows. Hunters generate gold, resource camps provide +5 population, blacksmith attack upgrades can be researched at military production buildings, cavalry benefit from archer armor, and cavalry archers benefit from cavalry armor from the previous age. It's a little wordy, but I'll help you out there once we get to the more in-depth descriptions. Cavalry archers and steppe lancers gain HP per relic that is collected, +5 in castle, +10 in Imperial Age to a max of 4. And the team bonus is that monks with relics take less bonus damage. Okay, so starting off with your first eco bonus that hunters generate gold, what we want to reflect here is the nomadic aspects of their economy. And basically what this means is that boars would be about 20 gold each, elephants 25, and deer would be about 10 each. And what this gives you is the ability to delay your gold miners a bit, and essentially you would have a really strong archer rush with the civ. You'd also have a pretty strong men-at-arms rush as well, and so that would, I think, give them a little bit of distinctiveness from, say, the Mongols, which of course they can do a lot of early rushing as well, but the Mongols are typically thought of more as a scout rushing civilization. I think Khitans would be much more geared towards being an archer opening civilization. Looking at our next civ bonus, it's the fact that resource camps provide +5 population. What we want to do here is reflect that sedentary aspect of their society. And what this would do is that it would reward efficiency. If you build 2 lumber camps, a mill, and a mining camp, that means you're not building 4 houses in the Dark Age and maybe the transition to Feudal Age. And that's going to save you 100 wood plus some villager work time. Additionally, it does create something of a trade-off that if you want to go for a faster uptime and say only go one lumber camp, you're not taking as much of this bonus into your benefits. And it would also encourage refreshing lumber camps later on, adding mills to farms, etc. Though deleting those lumber camps, you'd be deleting essentially a house, so you want to be careful about that. Taking a look at our blacksmith bonus, our first one is that the attack upgrades can be researched at military production buildings. So what we want to do here is reflect this idea of blacksmithing by nomadic peoples. And what this does is that it can save you from having to build a blacksmith in the early game. So oftentimes in archer rushes, you will have one range followed by a blacksmith. But for the Khitans, if you want to get fletching, right, you really don't need to do that. You can just go ahead and pick it up from the archery range. And that means that you might be able to build a second archery range or put down some farms, whatever you want to use with that wood. The way this works is that fletching, bodkin arrow, and bracer, your ranged upgrades, are available at the archery range, and forging and iron casting are available at the barracks. And basically the idea here is that if you want to go for fast fletching or fast forging for perhaps scouts or men-at-arms even, you can, but it does come with a cost, and that you are occupying that military production building by researching a technology, which means that you are delaying your unit production just a bit. And lastly, remember that armor upgrades are going to still require a blacksmith, so this does not get you out of having to make a blacksmith. It just means that you can delay it for a little bit longer, depending on your opening. Looking at our second blacksmith civilization bonus, the really wordy one where cavalry benefit from archer armor and cav archers benefit from cavalry armor from the previous age. Okay, so what we want to do here is think about this idea again of blacksmithing but of a high quality. And this, by the way, is going to compensate for some missing upgrades that'll help make this civilization stand out a bit from others. So how does this work? Well, let's start with cavalry for the example. Cavalry will benefit from researching padded archer armor, which is available in the feudal age, but they will get that benefit in castle age. Similarly, leather archer armor, which is researched in the castle age, your cavalry will benefit from that in imperial age. This doesn't mean delay the researching of those things, but it just means that when you hit the next age, if you already have that researched, that's when your cavalry will benefit from it. Your archers, of course, will benefit it from the moment it's researched. The same is going to be true for your cavalry archers. They'll benefit from the feudal age armor upgrade for your cavalry. They'll get that in the castle age. And then that chain barding armor in castle age, your cav archers will benefit from that in the imperial age. Taking a look at our next civ bonus regarding relics, cav archers and step lancers gaining HP per relic collected. This does not mean that you need to wait to collect relics. It just means that for however many relics you have garrisoned, up to 4, in castle age you get a certain amount of HP, in imperial age you get more. The idea here is that we want to try and give your mounted units a bit more specialization, make them a focus of the civ, but also take into account a little bit of history that the Karakai ruled over a largely Turkic or Muslim population, but were generally, in the Karakai, the Khitans were Buddhist, but they were generally seen as religiously tolerant, so we want to try and reflect that here. So what does this give you? Well, I will get into great detail on this, but for now, just know that getting 2 relics essentially gets you up to the level of your fully upgraded competitors in the Castle Age and in the Imperial Age. And once you start to get 3 to 4 relics, you start getting advantages over your peers. And now we will look at the team bonus. Monks with relics take 80% less bonus damage. What we want to do here is facilitate relic collection. And in terms of implications, what this means is that your light cav are going to kill monks in 4 hits instead of 2. And if you have sanctity, it'll be 5 hits instead of 3. Something to keep in mind here though, monks without relics cannot convert units. You have to drop a relic to try and do that. So if you want to do that with the Khitans, just remember that once you drop that relic, your monk no longer has protection because it's going to be taking the full bonus damage. So I think this really kind of balances out. I think this would be a great civilization to have for some of those maps like Arena, where maybe you want to collect relics, that kind of thing. Okay, so those are civ bonuses, and let's get into the unique units, and the civilization actually has 2 of them. The first is the Gurkhan, which is a mounted crossbowman that does an attack bonus against other mounted units. Now, it's worth noting that while there is an argument out there that the Chinese did make use of mounted crossbowmen in their armies more generally, and I have this work of art that is often used to justify that claim, I think it is very unclear to what extent that was widespread or even used to a point it would be militarily significant. However, I think that for the aesthetic value and the idea that we're going to try and create a civilization that has its own unique identity, we're just going to take the historical liberty on this one. So the Gurkhan, its stats, it's a little less expensive on the gold, a little more expensive on the wood than a typical cav archer. It has a little bit less attack than they do, a little bit less HP, no base melee or pierce armor. It has a base range of 4, but the elite version has a base range of 5, which is actually going to give you a little bit more range. However, you're pretty slow. The idea here is that you probably want to slow down and brace to fire the crossbow. In terms of bonuses, you're doing some decent bonus damage versus cavalry and camels, and then getting Parthian tactics that'll help you out as well. So at the end of the day, this is essentially like a Genoese crossbowman that the Italians have, but you are mounted. Moving on to the second unique unit, this is the Khitans Archer, and it's a foot archer that has an attack bonus versus unique units. This unit was really inspired for me by reading the fact that women in Khitan society tended to have a lot more of autonomy than some of their regional peers, and the fact that a number of important military and political leaders were in fact women. Many noteworthy strategists leading militaries into battle even were women as well, and for that reason I thought that this was a nice opportunity to have a female unique unit, and I took the sprite of the composite woman from Age of Empires 1 just because I thought it looked kind of androgynous, to be honest with you, and so that's what we're going to use here. In terms of the stats, the Khitans Archer is a little bit cheaper than a normal archer. The attack is a bit lower, the HP is also a bit lower. You don't have any base melee or pierce armor, and you do not get the last archer armor upgrade with the Civ. I'll talk a little bit more about that with the Blacksmith. However, you are a bit faster than normal foot archers, and you have the same range, which is good. And then, of course, you have the bonuses versus unique units. You get a little bit of bonus versus spearmen that basically puts you on par with the foot archer line. The crossbowman and arbalist have +3, but because the Khitans Archer has 1 less base damage, we're just going to give it +4. And that way you're good to go there. Notably also, you have some bonus anti-archer armor that essentially, if you're up against skirmishers, helps make up for the fact that you don't get the last armor upgrade, but of course it won't help you versus, say, arbalist or cavalry archers. Alright, moving to the unique technologies. In the Castle Age we have Tianqi, which lets your town centers generate gold up to a maximum of 9. Basically, what we're trying to do here is reflect the fact that the Khitans took efforts at public administration. And what this does is basically 3 town centers equal a relic, so you can get about 3 additional relics. But remember, town centers are expensive and you got to put them down. And that's actually quite a bit of stone cost. And it will provide some passive income for you, which is nice, but it shouldn't be anything too overwhelming. You can compare it to something like Burgundian Vineyards or paper money. I think it should be reasonably on par with those kinds of bonuses. Maybe even a little better, just because those bonuses are reliant on villagers working, and this just is reliant on your town centers being up. So, something to consider. Now in the Imperial Age, we have the unique technology Ordu Guardsmen. And what this does is it allows your light cavalry and cavalry archers to ignore anti-cavalry bonus damage. This is, I think, one of the defining technologies of the civilization, and we're trying to really emphasize the fact that your light cav and cav archers, that would be the sort of main military force you'd often see with the Khitans. Now, what this does, well, I'm going to go into this in detail in the tech tree section, but I assure you that it seems really powerful, and don't get me wrong, it is, but it might not be when you see the rest of the civilization's tech tree. It might not be as powerful as you think. Speaking of which, let's get into the Blacksmith. Basically, I'm going to start off with the Blacksmith and the stable, because I think if you can understand those two parts of the tech tree, the rest of the civilization then makes a lot of sense. In terms of the techs available, it's pretty weak. You're missing the last archer and cav armor, and you're also missing blast furnace. However, you got to remember that your stable units are going to benefit from those archer armor, but it's going to be a little bit later on. And your cav archers are going to benefit from those two cavalry armors, but again, it's going to be a little delayed. Additionally, remember, you can get your attack upgrades at barracks and archery ranges, and at the end of the day, you wind up, in the end, having the same pierce armor as a generic civ and 1 extra melee armor. It's kind of like the Romans in that way. So, not a lot of techs available, but it is pretty efficient in terms of getting there. Moving on to the stable, you can see that we have a number of limitations here. No knights at all, and no bloodlines. Now the blacksmith bonus is going to compensate to an extent, but it's only getting us part of the way there. Remember though, we also have the Ordu Guardsmen technology that will affect our light cav, and we do have heavy camels and step lancers. So let's take a look at what the armor bonus is getting us, and let's start with the light cav. Basically, this is what your light cav look like in Castle Age. Note the missing of bloodlines, but you do have an extra melee armor and an extra pierce armor. What this means is that in Castle Age, you're going to be a little bit better versus ranged units and worse versus melee units. Now, if we get to the Imperial Age, note you miss Blast Furnace, and you're still missing Bloodlines, of course, but you're going to have basically the Pierce Armor of a fully upgraded Light Cav, and you're going to have an extra melee armor. However, you're worse versus both melee and ranged because missing Blast Furnace and not having Bloodlines is a pretty big deal. And if we take a look at Camel Riders, again, similar story, a little bit more armor, but you're missing Bloodlines. Pretty comparable, I think, across all of the ages. It's just kind of the way the math works. Now let's think about Ordu Guardsmen and how that's going to affect your light cavalry. Well, your light cavalry will defeat fully upgraded halberdiers. Both units kill each other in 10 hits. It is worth noting that light cavalry have a bit of a faster rate of fire as well. Plus, they're going to have mobility. So this is something that once you research this technology, totally changes the dynamic between light cavalry and spears if you're the Khitans. Additionally, you can survive a number of more hits versus heavy camel riders, but remember, you're still going to lose because camels have essentially double the HP and Khitans lack Blast Furnace. So it's not like you can win against camels, but you'll trade better than perhaps Hussars, maybe even Cavaliers will do. It's also worth noting that the Khitan Light Cav are going to be cost effective in a variety of situations. Think about Genoese Crossbowmen, Kamiuk. This is a really nice opportunity to use your light cavalry. But with the Khitans, you always have to keep in mind, you miss Bloodlines and you miss Blast Furnace. So having that 1 extra melee armor in Imperial Age is going to be nice, but you're still going to struggle against a lot of other units in the game. Things like Knights, Archers, you should be okay against because you do get the 6 Pierce Armor, but you miss Bloodlines. If you go up against fully upgraded Hussars, you won't win those fights either. So again, you got to keep those things in mind. Now, Step Lancers. I'm saving Step Lancers here for last because remember, Step Lancers are affected by Relic Collection. So let's tackle Step Lancers in the Castle Age first. When you have 0 relics, your Step Lancers, as you can see, the Bloodlines, a little extra armor. And what that means is that, well, you're actually worse whether you're up against ranged units or melee units. Now, if we can get you up to 2 relics, we can basically get half of Bloodlines, but remember, we have a little bit extra melee and pierce armor. And what that does is it's going to make you a little bit better versus ranged units, but slightly worse versus melee units. And if we can get 4 relics, now we've replaced Bloodlines, and we have the extra armor. So now we're looking pretty good, right? Definitely good against ranged units, and a little bit better versus melee units, just because we have a little bit of extra melee armor. Let's go ahead and run it back in the Imperial Age with these Step Lancers. Looking at 0 relics, well, it's not great. Missing Bloodlines and missing Blast Furnace is pretty tough. You're not going to be very good versus ranged units. You'll be okay in melee. Getting to 2 relics essentially makes up for Blast Furnace, so that makes you comparable to the Elite Step Lancer. And when it comes to having 4 relics, you can see we get 120 HP. And now we're starting to look pretty good here. It is worth noting that from an equal units standpoint, you will still lose versus Cavaliers, but from an equal resources standpoint, where the Khitan Elite Step Lancer has an advantage in numbers, you should trade pretty evenly with Cavaliers. So you have that in your pocket, but remember, you have to spend the resources to get there. Now let's take a look at the archery range. And looking at foot archers, thinking about your foot archer line specifically, and the arbalist, it's not bad, but remember you are missing the less armor upgrade. Your cavalry archers, and I'll discuss this a bit more in a second, have variable performance. It really depends on your relic collection and if you can research Ordu Guardsmen in the Imperial Age. Additionally, the Khitans archers, I think actually do have some good situational utility for the Civ. It really just depends if your opponent is going to go into unique units, and I think it's not a bad archer anyways, given its speed and its cost effectiveness, but it's not going to be able to match the other foot archer in terms of getting the damage output on the field. Okay, so again, because the relic collection matters here, I want to do the same thing we did with the Step Lancer, going to look at Castle Age and Imperial Age, and you can see I've already broken this down here. I've done the testing on all this, but I'll give you kind of the basic summary here. This is what you look like when you have 0 relics. You can see you miss bloodlines, but again, same story, you have a little bit more armor. At the end of the day though, missing bloodlines is massive here, and it makes you worse than generic cav archers. Now once you get up to 1 relic, that essentially puts you on par with generic cavalry archer civs, and if you can get up to 2 relics, that's going to make you slightly better. Now when you get up to 4 relics, that's where things get interesting, because that's when you've made up for the missing bloodlines, but you're getting an extra pierce armor and an extra melee armor. And that'll put you on par essentially with Turk cav archers with Sipahi in the Castle Age. But remember, getting 4 relics is not something that you do in 5 seconds. It usually takes you a bit of time if you can even get there. Moving on to the Imperial Age, with 0 relics, you're gonna have all your armor upgrades, even getting a little bit extra melee armor, but you're missing bloodlines. What this does, and this is important, if you don't have any relics, your heavy cavalry archers are still going to be on par with other decent civs. Basically, it's going to be about the same as civs that either lack Parthian tactics or the last armor upgrade from the Blacksmith. So even with 0 relics, it's not bad. Getting 2 relics essentially puts you on par with fully upgraded heavy cavalry archers, and if you can get 4, that's where things get really juicy, and you are at the level of Turk or Tatar heavy CA. But that would be pretty good, and yet it's not all. We have to look at Ordu Guardsmen. What does this do? Well, that means halberdiers and camels are no longer hard counters to the Civ. Now, I think camels still have some potential as a soft counter, because if they have enough numbers, they can use their mobility to close the distance. And we do see sometimes hussars being pretty decent versus CA, and it's worth noting that heavy camel riders absorb 18 hits from heavy CA, and fully upgraded hussars absorb just 1 more hit. The problem for camels though is that this will not be a cost-effective trade, because camels cost gold and hussars don't. And remember, this also makes the halberdiers not really threaten your cavalry archers at all. But that's, I think, something of a misleading idea, because usually halberdiers are not a major threat to cavalry archers because you can just run away. So I think where this technology is having the biggest impact is actually making sure that camels that get on top of your army don't destroy it. Also keep in mind, skirmishers do full damage, and it's one thing if they're doing full damage and you've collected 4 relics, and you're still not in a great situation, but your cavalry archers are still pretty strong. But imagine if you only get, say, like 1 relic collected. All of a sudden at that point, your heavy cavalry archers are behind most civilizations. So that's where it gets kind of tough with this civ, is that, and I mentioned earlier, this idea of the variable performance. Because skirmishers, which are the primary threat, are still going to be just as much of a threat as they have been. You're definitely, when you research Ordu Guardsmen, it's not like your cavalry archers are going to be invincible. You still have a lot of threats to worry about, and this is especially true if you don't contest for relics. Taking a look at the barracks now, you don't have gambesons, but your halbs do get all the armor upgrades, which is nice. However, remember you missed blast furnace, so that's kind of a bummer. Taking a look at the dock, this is not a bad early game civ because of your civ bonuses, saving a little wood, getting a little gold, but you are going to run out of technologies in the late game. Looking at the siege workshop, you do miss some of your heavy hitter options like bombard cannons and siege onagers, but siege ram is nice to have, heavy scorpion is nice to have as well, so it's not a bad siege workshop, but it's not great either. Take a look at the university and monastery. No hoardings will make it a little bit tougher to keep those castles up. You have most of your technologies available, so it's not bad for the civilization. Siege engineers is nice, but it doesn't stand out necessarily as well. You should have some decent towers with this civ though, which is nice to see. And lastly, with the economy, missing the last wood upgrade is a bit of a bummer, but I think that given how much wood you save with this civ, with the resource camps, and you have other eco bonuses as well, I think it's justified. Alright, now that we've been through the design of the civ, think about the strengths and weaknesses. Think about this civilization in more broad terms. The Khitans have some strong openings. I would say definitely you probably want to open archers or men-at-arms, but scouts are fine too. You have a very efficient economy, and not only that, we have gold bonuses in the early game and the late game, which can be pretty strong. Now, late game is dependent on getting a technology, but it's not that expensive, and it is available in the Castle Age. You just have to make sure that you spend the resources on your town centers to take advantage of them. When it comes to your cavalry archers, they are potentially top tier, and the same goes for your steppe lancers, which tend to be cost effective. Now, one of the things that makes the Khitans very unique, and I mentioned at the beginning of this video, we do want the civilization to have a unique playstyle, is that you have units and technologies that let you do things that other civs can't do or maybe would struggle to accomplish. Additionally, in the early game, your galley rush is pretty good, and when we think about trash wars, if you're up against civs with weak light cavalry, if you can get to Ordu Guardsmen and make light cav, you could be in a pretty good position with this civ. Now when it comes to the weaknesses, you're missing a lot here. There's no bloodlines, there's no heavy cavalry, there's no gunpowder. Some would say that the blacksmith might be a little too limited, missing blast furnace. And when it comes to your sea and your steppe lancers, yeah, they could potentially be top tier, but it's up to you to get them there. It really comes down to the player to make that possible, and that also takes time. So opening up right out of the gate, you're not going to have that great Castle Age power spike, which is tough. Now going to the Imperial Age on the other hand, right, given that the amount of HP you get from relics will double, it's going to help you a bit more, but definitely that mid-game power spike is not there. And you put all that together and your opponent knows that you're going to need relics, and so your opponent can really try to move to stop you. So it seems you really have to do a good job to make sure that you get up to 4 relics, and I think in a lot of games it's going to be unreasonable to always expect, so it's going to be uncertain with this civ. Additionally, when it comes to being a flank civ, I think the civ's kind of mediocre, though I will say, given the strong archer openings, you still might find some play for the civ. It's just going to be a little bit tougher to play late. And lastly, while if you're up against weak light cav civilizations, you might be in a good spot with this civ, overall the trash units are not that great. Your skirms missed the last armor upgrade, your halbs missed blast furnace, and of course your light cavalry does have some limitations, so if you're up against, say, a decent hussar civ, you might find that you run into problems. Now I want to take a moment to talk about some ideas that I abandoned. One, I thought about the relic bonus providing HP regeneration, and I like that bonus, but I don't feel like we have a very good understanding of how that affects the battlefield, and I just decided that I think it was a little too... It introduced too much uncertainty for me to feel comfortable adding it. I thought about making the archery range technologies cheaper to give this a bit more of a link to the in-game Chinese, but I think they have enough early game bonuses to where that felt too strong. Thought about giving them access to knights, but the problem is that if you give Castle Age knights 5 pierce armor, they're very overpowered, so we can't do that. And I thought about limiting the access to heavy camel rider, but the truth is just that this civilization already misses so much in its technology tree that, well, I just felt that that might be taking it a bit too far. Okay, in summary, The Khitans have a really strong early game, and I think that you could even think of them even later in the game as something of an economic civ. They're just one built more around efficiency than massive growth. Now, it is worth noting, again, if you can get that Castle Age technology, which you probably almost always want to do, you do have an enduring economic bonus with the civilization, and it's a gold bonus, so there's a lot to like here. The civ is a difficult one to play. You miss some key technologies, and that means that you have to do things that are a little bit unorthodox as the game goes on. And what it also means is that if you're, say, trying to play in a tournament, this is a civilization that carries high reward but high risk. So it's not one of those civilizations that you know every game what you're going to get out from it. It depends on what you do in the game. Can you contest for relics? Can you, survive, this sort of lull in the mid game while you're trying to get those relics garrisoned? The multiple blacksmith upgrades, right? You want to make sure that you get those researched, but that's going to tax your economy a little bit too. So you're going to be researching additional armor upgrades so that you can take advantage of the civilization. And that's kind of tough. Again, you got to do things differently with the civ. And so I think that this is going to be a difficult one to just pick up and jump into immediately. I also think that it has unusual army compositions as well, especially the heavy CA light cav army. It's possible that it could be one of the strongest that you'll find, given that you can get heavy cavalry archers that have a lot of HP and that are also very difficult to counter with halves or camels. And your light cavalry, even though it's going to really struggle against melee units and range units for the most part, you still do have 6 pierce armor with it. And most importantly, right, is that your light cavalry isn't also going to be that affected by halberdiers or camels. But it's unusual in that if you run up against other heavy cavalry archer and light cav civilizations, it could get kind of tricky as well, because some civilizations are going to have just as good a CA, and then light cav they're a little bit beefier. So you got to think about what to do about that. And that's not the only army comp you have. You do have step lancers, arbalesters. I think both unique units can also function well, probably are a bit more situational. I think at the end of the day, there's a question with the Khitans. Are they an athletic civ that is efficient, that compensates for some of its deficiencies, and you might even say has a lot of unique talents depending on how you play them, as long as you can succeed in their civ design? On the other hand, perhaps for some players they might consider them a bit too limited and a bit too unorthodox. Again, I think that's an open-ended question. I think I lean a little bit to the former, but I'm kind of biased. Okay, now we've come to the end of the Khitans. I hope you enjoyed listening to my civ design here, and this raises the question, are we done with this Masters of Eurasia DLC? We might be, we might not, but for the next civ concept, I think we're going to take a little bit of trip somewhere different. And I'll give you guys a clue. Okay. With that being said, guys, I'm JimJames59, and as I always say, definitely like and subscribe to the video, and if you don't do it for me, do it for the Hussars. With that being said, I'll see you on the ladder. Peace.